Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm Justin, and tonight we are going to discuss 1981's Road Games, directed by Richard Franklin and starring Stacy Keach, Jamie Lee Curtis, Marion Edward, and Grant Page. Pat Quid is an imaginative American truck driver hauling loads across Australia. One night outside a motel, Pat sees a man and a hitchhiking woman go into a motel, and the next morning he starts to play an imaginary game that the man is possibly a killer. Unfortunately, this coincides with news reports of a real madman picking up hitchhikers. Pat eventually picks up his own hitchhiking companion, and the two soon realize that their playful road games of identifying a killer might actually be leading them straight into the crosshairs of a real-life psychopath. Road Games is for the horror fan that would enjoy a 1980s take on Hitchcockian themes. Also joining me tonight is my talented co-host, Zena Dixon. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm Justin, and with me, as always, is the fun and fabulous real queen of horror, Zena Dixon. How you doing tonight, Zena?
I'm doing well. Hello. Thank you again for the invite.
Absolutely. And let's jump in because I'm super excited to discuss this one. It's 1981's Road Games. As always, no spoilers at first. You will not get bitten. We will let you know when spoilers are coming. But as of right now, you're safe. So I've related this story several times on this channel. I grew up with horror movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. Halloween was one that I came to on my own at about 14. And obviously I was obsessed. And it coincided with like Scream being released. And after that, I never looked back. But it was really just an amazing time in horror. Well, I already, though, loved, even before I saw Halloween. In fact, I think the reason I really gave Halloween a chance was because of Jamie Lee Curtis, who I already loved at this time from True Lies, My Girl. But after Halloween, I needed to see then everything she was in, especially like after Scream lists out her horror resume of like The Fog, Prom Night, Terror Train, Why is Jamie Lee Curtis in all of Randy's movies? And this was a time long before streaming, and Amazon was barely even a thing. You always had the video store option, but it would depend on your video store and a copy of what you were looking for. Well,
Right.
I remember looking up on the internet all of Jamie Lee Curtis's movies. I think this was before IMDb too, so I'm sure it was just some like strung together website, but it did list enough of her movies, and it was easy enough to get copies of Halloween, Halloween 2, previously viewed at Blockbuster or Suncoast, and I bought those right away. Then I was able to rent Prom Night, Fog, Terror Train, and we discussed how much we love Terror Train. But looking at her list of movies, I could see Road Games, and so and I think it, like I said, it was on a website, and I'm pretty sure it listed like thriller or something. And I remember like hearing like Halloween 2 was her last horror movie, but I was like, well, what is this Road Games? I kept getting the impression that maybe it's a horror movie, maybe it's not. I don't know. So I was like, well, maybe Road Games could fit, and if so, I have to see it, especially at that time of those were my favorite era of Jamie Lee Curtis movies at that point. So it was stuck in my brain for a really long time, but it like wasn't until my mid 20s or so that I finally like got to like after seeing it and realize, oh yeah, it's not really a slasher film, but it has that sort of energy. And
Hmm.
after watching like interviews and special features on it, I realized, it obviously took influence from what was popular at the time. It was not intended to be like a slasher movie, but the marketing really kind of edged that in, and they
Right.
added some scenes to kind of give it that quality. But really, it's more of a thriller film. In fact, I'd say it's more of a Hitchcockian thriller, sort of like Rear Window on Wheels, which makes sense as the director, Richard Franklin, was heavily influenced by Alfred Hitchcock. And he was the director of what I consider to be maybe the greatest horror sequel of all time, which is Psycho 2. Um, it's, one of those films that I feel like it's not that it's overlooked, it's underlooked. Like, as in, everybody watches Psycho and just assumes there's no reason to continue on, but Psycho 2 is worth continuing on. And a lot of it does have to do with, writing from Tom Holland, horror icon legend, and Richard Franklin's direction in it. And Road Games is more of the Hitchcockian thriller, and there is like this solid mystery, you know, in combination with the transition of Jamie Lee Curtis into her like more known persona throughout the 80s. You really can start to see that in Road Games. It's a charismatic performance from Stacy Keach as he believes he is on the trail of a serial killer. And this film is one I love the opening. The opening sequence gets you right into it. You
Mhm.
have this truck driver or guy who drives a truck named Pat Quid, who's setting up that he will like need to make this delivery. He is funny and charming with a lot of personality. He watches though this other guy and this girl that was hitchhiking like go into this motel, and he sort of creates in his mind like, oh, maybe there's something weird there. Um, but then you shift to this like really dark hotel room with like these neon lights, but then this really like stark white bathroom with like it's just such an effective moment. And as this person, so again, this is the opening scene, everybody. So
Mhm.
very minor spoiler. He exits the bathroom, and it's like split the darkness where this woman who is nude, and so clearly they've done it.
Mhm.
She's just playing the guitar, living her life, and it's like the close up of her eyes as this like wire that he's been like up to no good fiddling around with in the bathroom comes down across her eyes, and it's just a really exciting opening. And it's not again going to be a slasher film, but you can see that sort of influence, and it's a really great. So Road Games, again, the acting is pitch perfect. Stacy Keach is this truck driving philosopher. He isn't exactly misanthropic or cynical, but he believes like he has human nature pegged. And
Mhm.
Jamie Lee Curtis, who I guess had a lot of issues with Australia, like allowing her to be in the movie, is really great in this, and it wouldn't work without her because they have
Yeah.
such a great chemistry, her and Stacy Keach. Richard Franklin says his one regret is not using Jamie Lee Curtis more in this movie, and I have to agree 100%. She should always be used more in movies. And along with that commentary, there are these images throughout of this like pig meat that Pat Quid is transporting, and it's like the food being stored might be this sort of like parallel to the bodies of women being stored by a killer. There's
Mhm.
this great line that Jamie Lee Curtis delivers, and she writes on the back of the truck about like tomorrow's bacon, pig in a poke, you better start shaking. Today's pig is tomorrow's bacon. And it's really like the consumerism of the time, the 80s, the world we live in, but also like devouring each other. Again, there's a lot of like subtext here, but it's not like again over. Road Games is about taking the viewer on a ride through the Australian outback with quirky characters observing and dialoguing on human nature while trying to solve a mystery. It's not a horror film per se, but it definitely is from the school of Hitchcock and has horrific moments that linger in the imagination with a really thrilling murder mystery. But Zena, what are your thoughts on your non-spoiler thoughts on Road Games? How did you first come into it? What do you think?
Well, thank you so much for the backstory of some of that because I was always curious about why they didn't use Jamie Lee Curtis more. But I also might have a theory on that and how it still works. So, thankfully for me, a friend recommended this movie to me. For the longest time, I would always see the poster, but for some reason, I never watched it. And I will say this, when I rewatched it again last week, it's like it felt like a made-for-TV movie in a way. But I don't remember ever really seeing it on TV as a kid because I'm pretty sure, I'm not saying it never played. I'm just saying, at least for me, I never came across it. If I would have, I'm pretty sure I would have watched it because I didn't know who Jamie Lee Curtis was as a kid, but I remember seeing her a lot, kind of similar to what you said. So it's just kind of like, thankfully, again, a friend recommended it to me because we were doing like a Jamie Lee Curtis marathon in a way. And so I was like,
Oh,
you know what? I've never seen this movie. And he was like, you have to watch it. You're going to love it. And normally, like, he knows like my taste and what I like. So I watched it for the first time actually last year, last October.
wow.
And yeah, and it's like, I wish I would have watched it sooner. I feel like if you're someone who loves like I don't want to say like a road trip because it's, Quid is doing his work, but it is somewhat of a road trip, I feel like this movie, it would fit in perfectly with like Joyride,
Mhm.
Roadkill, you know what I mean? Monster Man,
Yes, yeah.
because it just all blends in. Even though, no, it's not a horror. I do feel like it's more of a thriller, but I do feel like horror fans will enjoy this a lot because it has some stuff, but not like a lot. And then even when it comes to the director, the weirdest thing is, like I said, I he directed one of my favorite movies, Patrick. Patrick from 1978. And oh my gosh, it's about this patient where he doesn't speak. He just stares and he has like these powers, He's kind of in a coma, but his eyes are open. Anyway, so it's just so cool because and that's an Australian horror, but it has some science fiction in it. But my point is, I'm sorry, that's a different rabbit hole. I will say
No, I
this,
don't think I've seen that though. It sounds really interesting though.
it is great, and they did a remake, and the remake is still great as well. I don't remember what year the remake came out, but I remember watching the original one first, and that's gonna bother me. I'll get back to you on that. But back to this movie though, I really, really enjoyed this movie. I love the characters. I really love the character Quid. I just think that he's so interesting. I love the fact that he's a loner. At least he has that loner vibe, but you can tell that he's a good person. And I do feel that him and Hitch, they fit, well, Pamela, Jamie Lee
Right.
Curtis character, they fit together so well because it's like, I feel like she's very independent and adventurous. So even when he starts talking about I don't want to get into what made me laugh, but there's a scene I really love. But when they start talking about, this serial killer, that's not a spoiler. It's in the synopsis, okay?
Right,
But
right.
they start talking about that, instead of getting scared, Hitch is all in. She wants to know all about it, and she has her own theories, and it just works. Whereas previously there was someone else in the in the truck with him, and she was scared. So, and that made me laugh. But I mean, it's understandable. That is kind of like, why are you talking about that? But yeah, I really enjoy this movie. I feel like there's just so much to love about it. I love how they just blend something that's very familiar that we've seen before, but it's still, entertaining. And in some ways, I do feel like this is one of those like lesser known gems where I feel like if
Mm.
more people watched it or seen it, I think that they'll enjoy it. And I'm saying this as someone who watched it late, and I wish that I would have watched it sooner. And I do agree with you. It does have that Hitchcock vibe. It feels very like Duel or The Hitcher. I mean, I know that's not like Hitchcock, but you know what I mean. It just has like that vibe that's going on. So if you're a fan of Hitchcock, Duel, or The Hitcher, I feel like you would enjoy this movie.
Yeah, well, from here on out, everybody, spoilers, spoilers. You've been warned, spoilers. We want to talk about it. I agree completely. And I think that, no, I think you actually are making a point or a point that I wanted to make, which is that, it is an updated Hitchcockian film into the time, though, of when it was made. So I think making, like, it does blend ideas from, like, The Hitcher or
Hmm.
slashers of the time.
Hmm.
It's like what Hitchcock would have done in 1981, maybe if he was in
Yeah.
Australia or something. So, I think that it is sort of relevant. And I also love your comparison or bringing up Joyride because I agree, and I didn't really think about that, but yeah, it 100%
Hmm.
fits in that sort of category of like the road movies, thriller road movies for sure. And also, it does discuss like class. When you were talking about Hitch and or Pamela, but I'll probably call her Hitch for most of this,
Yeah.
with Pat. It's interesting because he's an older working class guy. She is a young socialite, borderline socialite, which obviously Jamie Lee Curtis could relate to, being a Beverly Hills star or daughter of two famous actors. But Jamie Lee Curtis is still Jamie Lee Curtis, and she didn't buy into that sort of debutante-ness, which is what the
Yeah.
character of Hitch really does. And it's why I think you really get to see, as this is one of Jamie Lee Curtis's first, like, the Jamie Lee Curtis roles, because Halloween, Laurie Strode's nothing really like her, and it's her first movie, kind of prom nightish maybe, but I think around Terror Train is when she was starting to you see the performer coming out. I think Road Games really gets that. But it does have this
Yeah.
sort of class dynamics. But it shows that like even though he's this older working class guy and she's this younger socialite type, like they still have something to talk about and they still
Mhm.
can cross those paths. But
Yeah.
as we get into let's go ahead and jump into performances then because I agree. I love Stacy Keach in this as Pat Quid. He fancies
Mhm.
himself as this sort of road philosopher. He prides himself on being educated while struggling with being the thought of being a truck driver. It is a respectable job, but he sees himself as different than others in his field. He has a wonderful relationship with his so-called dingo Boswell. And although he is old for Jamie Lee Curtis, there is a definite attraction between the two, and it transcends sort of their age. I think he is
Mhm.
likable, but you could see how he could be a lot to many
Yeah.
people, which is probably true for a lot of people that spend a significant amount of time solo or on their own, meaning, his sense of humor gets taken wrong, or people get kind of thrown by his sincere honesty. He is who he is. And with that kind of security, people get intimidated and
Mhm.
therefore defensive and assume he could be a killer. I think that is sort of kind of the way things work sometimes.
Yeah.
Jamie Lee Curtis as Hitch, again, or Pamela, she's just great. I think I already kind of started to say this, but just to kind of get it out there, there is definitely one of the first times this is it where we really get to see Jamie Lee Curtis and what she would do, at least in the 80s and 90s with her career. Her extroverted personality. It's a perfect transition for her out of the slasher genre, which she consciously wanted, you know, but this does slip from like that horror to thriller mystery. And she holds her own with Stacy Keach. She calls him out and gets called out back. They have great chemistry, and you can tell that they had fun together, which is good because Australia gave her kind of a tough time as an American actress. They really felt that an Australian actress should have been cast, which I really can understand. But it's Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, we need Jamie Lee Curtis. Stacy Keach is rightfully proud of his performance. He does a great interview on the Blu-ray disc where he like talks about just how much fun he had with Jamie Lee Curtis, how they had like a lot of fun playing on these sand dunes. But
Oh,
apparently they found out afterwards that there were like some very deadly creatures like living in the sand that they were just like rolling around in. So something like snakes or something else that's like I don't know. But they really do. The two have a great chemistry together. And yeah, she's not in it a lot. And I wish she was in it more. But I also, it does add to the suspense of the movie, et cetera, not having her in it as much. And you want more. But Marion Edward as Frida, I believe that this woman is a housewife and homemaker that is on a trip with her family. I believe that she has this, like, I love her, like, straightforward approach to life while not being afraid to also throw a little sarcasm back to Pat. And she also has this really great, like, comedic caution, like, with that she is aware that she is stuck in a truck with a strange man. Like when she starts holding her hairspray in her hand to like be ready to spray it as like mace with one false move. And you really feel for her though when she is like in terror. She spooks herself, and you find out there's a backstory of why, but and she explains, like her family and husband have been targeted due to her husband's like business being on strike. So
mhm.
it all makes sense, but like Pat, we mistakenly assume that she is just this like surfacey woman, but there's actually a lot going on underneath. And like I said, when she gets like scared, you really feel for her.
Yeah.
But she also, she holds her own and she's funny in this too. Now, the last kind of main role would be Grant Page as Smither Jones or the killer, if you will. Obviously, he doesn't have a lot to say in this movie, but he is genuinely spooky.
Mhm.
I hate to just go off of somebody's looks, but he was cast for a reason. He has this great malevolent sort of underneath quality that's like radiating beneath the surface.
Mhm.
And just regular enough, I guess, that like people would think like he's just a normal guy, but you can very easily see why Pat is like, something's not right about this guy. So I think he does a great job too. Again, it's not like a talking, speaking role that has a lot to do, but he really does shine at the end, and I think he's very effective as the sort of killer. Yeah, killer in
Yeah.
this movie. So, but what did you think of the overall performances?
Okay, well, first I do want to start with Frida because she's my favorite.
Nice.
She's my favorite. I know we didn't see her a lot, but you kind of touched on it. I love when she's like, she gets in the car because she needs a ride and she has the hairspray in her hand. But the thing is, it's like, okay, you got into the truck on your own. on your own. And as a woman, I relate because yeah, say we're playing a fun game and then he just starts talking about serial kill or bodies, and that is kind of weird. Like, what are you doing? So it's like, of course, I felt for her, but I don't know. There was just something about because she went from like 0 to 100, but you're the one who got in the car. Not saying that she deserved it, she didn't, but it's like, girl, you probably would have just been better off walking. Just walk, you know. And then the fact that again, Quid could have left her running running in the wild, but he went to go get her. And it's kind of like what you said, where it's like, yeah, Quid is a lot. He seems peaceful, but he's a lot. I think I love the fact how he's so observant in the movie. And then as the movie goes on, he becomes more and more like paranoid, which is understandable. You know what I mean? Because it's just like you get this hunch and you kind of want to go after it because and like you knew this about him because he was like talking to himself
Right.
and talking to Boswell, which Boswell is a great listener, so I get it. But yeah, like he gets involved even though he doesn't want to get involved. But I really like the character Quid. I think that he's just likable. You know what I mean? Like I would have been freaked out too and think like, hey, you would kind of seem like you are the serial killer because you're by yourself. You're no one knows who you are. Then even when he stopped at like that, it was like this restaurant, gas station, or this bar, and then he pretty much screams about like dead bodies to
Right.
because the guy
Right.
couldn't hear him, and it's just like everybody heard what you said, so it's like why not? And then Jamie Lee Curtis character, I love the character Hitch. I did want to see more of her, but I will say this, I think it wasn't her story. So like my theory on this, it wasn't her story. It's Quid's story on this. And it's like I kind of felt like he's similar to the character LB in Rare Window. You know what I mean? Where it's like instead of, him being in a wheelchair, he's in a truck, with binoculars, checking some stuff out. I mean, they both have binoculars, but like I feel like it was his story and she's someone who I feel like she kind of in she was refreshing because she encouraged him in a way. You know what I mean? First we had Frida and it's just like, making him seem like he's like paranoid with some stuff. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, maybe he was just taking a dump at the side of the road when he saw like the van driver and he's
Yeah.
digging a hole. But that is weird. And so it's just the fact that, he's trying to talk about this and Frida's uncomfortable, but Hitch, she just seemed kind of into it. And I think that that is like a good start where it's like, no, you have to kind of like think, like a killer. Why would he do that? How does he act with women? Type of thing, and those are questions to like really ask. So again, I just loved how she wasn't easily scared. Clearly, she was out there in the wild, hitchhiking alone. She listened to his theories and she was like actually making him think about stuff. That's a good match. And something I will say, I normally wouldn't like the age difference and them trying to have like this, budding romance, but I don't know. It just kind of works because, even though Hitch is young, she's mature, she's of age, and with Quid, he doesn't seem like a sleazy old man. He didn't even really seem that old, actually. I'm thinking he was probably like what in his late 30s, 40s, you
Yeah.
know?
In retrospect, I try and think, especially with early 80s movies, she's supposed to be about early 20s. He's
Hmm.
late 30s. So I can live with that.
Right. And I
Yeah.
still feel like that like works. And it wasn't
Yeah.
like they like immediately just got naked with each other. You know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying? Like,
Absolutely.
I love the fact that it was actually a friendship. And you know how it is sometimes, especially like with movies in the from the 80s and 90s, even nowadays, it's just, 1 minute they're talking, then they're in love. When did that happen?
Right.
So
Right.
I love
No,
the
I
fact
like
that
it
this
too
is
that
that.
yeah.
Yeah. And then the fact that it was just like, okay, if Pamela, okay, that's jumping ahead. I'll leave it alone with that. But yeah, and then with the serial killer, the man in the van, like you said, he doesn't say anything, but there is something about him that is so creepy, that is so chilling. And I remember when I first watched the movie and that opening where we're in like kind of like this, or we see that dark hotel room, and this woman, like you said, she was literally just living her life, playing the guitar, and then you just see a string, a very thin string, and it's just like that is chilling, but it all just flows perfectly. So this movie, you didn't ask, but I just have to say this movie, I love how it has something for everyone. There's a little bit of romance, there's action, there's a mystery. There's some horror elements that's going on. Not that I ever thought it was Quid. I just thought that he was just, one of those guys where, again, he likes to talk to himself. And again, it's like he was trying to not get involved. So that's also refreshing because I'm sure that you also had a job before in your life where it is so boring. You know what I mean? And then your mind, it just starts to wonder and like, you would ultimately still think about that stuff. So, but yeah, that's long story short. Yeah, those are my thoughts on the characters.
Well, I think you make some good points, or at least there's some observations that are really well made there, which is like this movie, yeah, it's not like terrifying the whole movie, but there's some really good scares in there, some really good like the wire coming through and stuff. And I don't need necessarily a movie to be like scary the whole time through to enjoy it, or only drama the whole time through. And I love that about this movie that like we get to these moments of fear, but a lot of the movie is these sort of introspective thoughts being spoken aloud, which just to kind of circle back around with Stacy Keach's Pat Quid, you need an actor like this because yeah, you're right, it's not Jamie Lee Curtis's story, and I'm glad you kind of said that because it snapped my brain into thinking it's not her story. It's about him interacting with these different types. Yes, she is the first person to just kind of finally accept him. And I love that it could be
Yeah.
romantic, it could be just a friendship, but she's the first person to at least accept him or play the game with him, the road game with him. Whereas, Frida, she just was not going to. She didn't want to. The most she would do is I Spy. That's about it.
Yeah.
And you need an actor like Stacy Keach, who is very handsome and charming, and
Oh
I
my God.
can
I meant to
100%
say
believe
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I believe that she could, totally have feelings
Mhm.
for him. And but you need somebody like him to carry this movie through because it is Pat's story. And anyway, I just really like that you kind of emphasize that because it made me think about his performance. And I'm sure we'll say this more throughout in different ways as we get through our favorite scenes and stuff. But you need an actor like him because it's his story as he's interacting with these people. It's just Jamie Lee or Hitch is the character that sticks, and it's kind of nice. But well, as we get into our favorite scenes, I'll just say seeing the Australian outback itself is breathtaking, mate. I love it. I love seeing the just the scenery, the
Yeah.
driving through. I mean, I love a lot of Australian movies, and quite a few of them give us different, Muriel's Wedding gives us more of a Sydney approach. Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert also gives us that outback approach, and this one too. And I think it's just always interesting to kind of see that stuff, but
Yeah.
the scenes between Pat and Frida, the housewife that he picks up, I love their banter back and forth as they play typical card games like I Spy, but then it transitions into this cold fear, and that's how the movie overall is. What I was just saying a minute ago, like you're kind of in a scary moment, then things are kind of fine, and then the characters then kind of scare themselves, so it's not really scary for us, but then something happens, and this is a great moment like that because it is sort of this scene where she's joking back and forth with him, and as she points out the van, he starts thinking and it turns, and I
Hmm.
just really like that sort of transition from this cold fear or to cold fear as she gets spooked.
Yeah.
It ends on the cliffs, which granted the scenery is beautiful,
Oh,
and
gorgeous.
as the audience that like Pat is innocent, but you hope she won't do anything stupid out of fear.
Yeah.
And I love that even as he saves her, she's still deadly serious with him, and she does not want to play this debating what if game with him anymore, unlike Hitch later on, who does. I don't know if it is one of my favorite scenes, but one to note is the sort of road rage of the boat guy. We've all been there. We all know how Pat feels. We all know how the boat
Yeah.
driver feels, but it's somehow a shocking and satisfying scene. Again, I would say it's necessarily one of my favorite, but it makes sense in a movie that's about traveling the roads. You're gonna have some road rage, and it's so like not relevant to the story other than like every character he interacts with ends up in the final scene, like when he's on the spot. And so everybody's got a reason to like be suspicious of him. But
Yeah.
it's definitely an action scene, and that's what again, it has a little bit of everything. This movie, there's a little action in there too. So for
Hmm.
anybody looking for that, one of my favorite scenes though is the campfire evening with Pat and Hitch, and like I said earlier, that tomorrow's bacon moment. But there's this also just really great moment after they've been sitting there and discussing still the this potential killer's motivations because they still don't know for sure. It's all just a game speculation, But there's this really great moment at the end of that scene where it's getting dark now, and Jamie Lee Curtis is like walking off, I think, to try and use the like find a spot to go to the bathroom. And she's looking off in the
Oh,
distance as the lightning kind of strikes, and she can see the killer's van and realizes that they're being watched. It's a really quietly
yeah.
chilling moment that I just think is incredibly effective.
Mhm.
But the restaurant or the rest stop bathroom scene with Jamie Lee Curtis and Hitch is definitely one of the best crafted scenes in the movie, I think. It starts with Hitch deciding to give her dad and stepmom a call as recommended by Pat, which also is why he's a good influence on her. Like
Mhm.
even though she's young and feeling her rebellion, it's good to let the people in your life know that you're safe, and somebody older is going to know that. So she decides to give them a call, and it's predictably frustrating, but she did the right thing. But
Mhm.
then there's this alarm that plays throughout the scene as this like symbolic warning as, Hitch sees the killer's van, Pat thinks the killer's in the bathroom stall of the rest stop, and Hitch decides to investigate the van. Unfortunately, Pat is wrong about the bathroom, and the killer is sleeping in the van. And
Yeah.
when Hitch is in there, his eyes just like snap open on her, and then they're gone. It's a great scene and perfectly effective. And
Yeah.
it's a little bit frustrating for me that Pat is like willing to believe that Hitch maybe just ditched him. He does start off like stampeding like a hero, but he's misinterpreting, which
Mhm.
is a great commentary on like even though he has instincts that are razor sharp, that there is this killer. It goes to show how even somebody who's very insightful can misinterpret somebody based on, I think, their own insecurities. But what I was going to say is that it's a little bit frustrating that he is willing to believe that she just kind of ditched him at a certain point. And he assumes that, like, when he comes across this honeymooning couple, that it's Hitch and the killer making love, etc. And I guess, like I said, I think it's supposed to show his insecurity, but it's still a little frustrating where I'm like, Hitch, come on. Or I'm
Yeah.
sorry, no, I'm like, Pat, come on. Hitch wouldn't just do this. But I do find something about the scene where Pat is walking through his truck's storage freezer afterwards to like count all that meat very, very scary. It's claustrophobic. You're
Yeah.
in those sort of unflattering lights that are like in a big freezer. There's just these like stacks of meat dangling,
Mhm.
and he's looking through all the dead meat, which obviously takes on this like subtext pointed meaning as you're watching a thriller film and have already seen one woman dead. Hitch is now missing. You know that she was not one of the couple. So we know that she's not okay. But I can just feel like how alone Pat is out there on the road in this
Yeah.
freezer, and you are looking at this meat wondering if a dead body could maybe be mixed in, if it's Hitch, etc. So I just think it's a really, really creepy, great scene. And then also I love there's this cool effect later on with like Pat's driving and he's sort of putting all the puzzle together and the lights just kind of come down over his eyes and
Yes.
give this sort of like glow.
Okay. Pretty much you said a lot of the scenes as well, especially that one when Hitch, she's going to the bathroom, trying to find a place to go to the bathroom, and that van, oh my gosh. But it makes me wonder, she didn't say anything. She didn't say anything at all. It's like, no, we have to go. But maybe she felt protected, maybe it was a coincidence, but that was so creepy. One part that I really love, besides from the scene with Frida, her running, that made me laugh. I love the scene where Quid, he stops at this like way station. And this is, because he spots the van, he's chasing the van, and it's like you want him to catch, the guy. And so you're like, come on, come on, come on. Everything seems to be coming in, in the way and everything like that. I also love when the van or when the truck it gets stuck. It gets stuck
Yes.
in that alley. And again, it's just like one of those situations where it's just like, even though I've seen it before, I'm like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? And I felt when Quid was strangling the guy from the van because all the stuff that he put him through, you have people thinking that it's him. The cops, remember Frida was on the news and she was or she was not on the news, but she was saying to somebody about how like, oh yeah, he almost pushed me off the cliff. Like
Right.
Frida,
Right.
that's not true. But it made me laugh. And but I really do love that part as well, where it's just like, after Pamela's found and she was able to tell the cops what really happened and everything like that. And Quid says this thing where it's just like, oh, I thought that he got you pretty much. I thought that she was in the truck, part of the pigs or something, right? And he said something like it was like a really cool ending, but then you have someone who's cleaning up, who's cleaning the trucks. You know, it's empty. They took all the meat out, and oh my gosh, there's like this string that's hanging, and so she pulls on the string, and a head falls into her soap bucket. Like, not only did that make me laugh, but that's horrifying because it's like there were no loose ends. Literally,
Right.
there was like that loose end, but they pulled it and they told us what happened with that. So I don't know. I thought that was pretty cool. I love the fact that there was so much with these scenes, like you said, it's not so much of scenes, it was moments because it either has like that comic relief or there's like that crazy obstacle again with the weigh station, like something that's supposed to be super simple and it's like, oh no, there's stuff in your tires. So, but yeah, those are my favorite scenes.
But yeah, as we've jumped into the climax and the ending, everything comes to a head. Again, this film, unsurprisingly, due to the director's love of Hitchcock, pulls the entire cast together again, from Frida the housewife to the boat guy to the killer. And you're right, it is sort of like no matter how many times you see it, I don't know if it's maybe just being that being drivers, we know that feeling of like when you have to squeeze through a
Mhm.
tight space and you know that he has this giant truck. It is scary every time, like, oh no, or it's tense, suspenseful. But only this time it is more spectacular with the semi truck riding over and crushing the van. Although initially persecuted, Pat does prove his innocence and Hitch is saved. I enjoy the ending, but honestly, I think the rest of the movie is more fun. I'm not a big fan of being frustrated about the wrong guy being accused
Yeah,
when we know he's the hero. But I get it. I just end up feeling too frustrated for the hero in these kind of moments to actually enjoy the truth coming out, which is, I guess, what we're supposed to be focused on.
right.
But I'm not complaining about the ending. It's just that it's not my favorite like trope. I do love though that Hitch is alive and saved, and a little annoyed at the police. She ultimately clears Pat's name, and the killer is caught. And I like that overall we get a little bit about these characters but really only kind of like get dropped into a few days of their story. We don't find out the killer's exact motivation or why he did what he did. We don't know Pat and Hitch's complete pasts or what's going to happen in their future. But we don't need to. We still like them and are glad that Pat and Hitch make it out okay. We see that Frida was reunited with her husband, and that's life
Mhm.
sometimes. And
Yeah.
even though not everything is completely wrapped up like in a bow, I feel complete. I feel a complete story has been told. You could tell that it definitely felt the pressure of comparing to the popular slashers of the time. And that's probably why it wasn't more successful. And the marketing definitely pushed that slasher element that's not really there. But like you said, it does end with like this sort of head dropping, the pulling on the string. I thought you explained that well, that like it does give you one final like jump scare, and so it has those moments. It's not like the whole movie is composed of those notes,
Mhm.
but it does play a few instruments there.
Just again, I just feel like if you're looking for something fun to watch, that has the little mystery, that there's some action, I recommend this movie. I mentioned this earlier. This is a very familiar storyline in a way, but the way they deliver, the way certain scenes play out, it really works. And then
Mhm.
again, with the characters, you feel you like the characters. There wasn't any character, even the killer. I'm not saying I liked him, but I was curious, like, what's this guy's deal? But again, it's not his story. So
Right.
I love how we keep on getting reminded of that. So yeah, just I feel like it feels like fall, not necessarily like Halloween. And I know that it's sunny and everything, but it just feels like a fall movie. Maybe because I watched it last year for the first time. It was like October, so around this time. But yeah, and again, it would be perfect with a lot of like road trip horror movies or thrillers.
Yeah, I feel like for me, it's the end of summer going into fall type of movie.
Mhm.
That's what it is for me. So I definitely can relate to
Yeah.
that. I think Road Games is for the horror fan that would enjoy an 80s take
Hmm.
On Hitchcock. There's this fantastic setting in Australia's Outback as we travel along with a truck driver philosopher, in combination with an early glimpse at what Jamie Lee Curtis, would really become in the 80s and 90s as an actress. There are light tones balanced by tense moments, and we are taken along on a ride to solve an amusing mystery. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House. Are you a fan of road games What is your favorite early Jamie Lee Curtis performance? Do you like Hitchcockian thrillers? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thank you, Zena Dixon, the real queen of horror, for joining us. As always, you can find Zena over at Wicked Horror on YouTube under her Real Queen of Horror moniker, or over at realqueenofhorror.com. And I'm Justin. You can also find me at Wicked Horror, 401 Pop Culture, or on Twitter. Thanks, Zena, for discussing road games with me. I had a blast talking about it with you.
Thank you so much. I had a blast as well.
Always a pleasure. We'll talk to you all next time. Have a good one.
Bye.